A letter meant for her ex lands in a stranger's hands, one whose grief mirrors her own. As their words cross through ink and time, a connection sparks, but when they meet face to face, the truth could change everything. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The rain pounded against the windows of Camille Drew's small apartment. 2 years had passed since Jason had walked out of her life just 3 weeks before their wedding. 2 years of questions without answers, of wondering what she'd done wrong. Tonight, the loneliness felt heavier than usual. Camille sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold beside her, and pulled out a sheet of paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she uncapped her pen. "I need to let this go," she whispered to herself, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. "I need to move on." She began to write, her neat handwriting flowing across the page. "Dear Jason, it's been 2 years since you left. 2 years of wondering why I wasn't enough. 2 years of walking past our favorite coffee shop and feeling my heart break all over again. I don't know if you'll ever read this or if you even care anymore, but I need to say goodbye properly, the way we never did." The words poured out of her, all the pain, the confusion, the sleepless nights. She wrote about the wedding dress that still hung in her closet, tags attached, about how she'd stayed in Millfield even though every street corner held a memory, about how she was trying, day by day, to become someone new. By the time she finished, tears had smudged some of the ink, but she didn't care. This wasn't about making something perfect. It was about letting go. The next morning, Camille walked to the post office before her shift at Turning Pages, the bookstore where she'd worked since moving to Millfield. The letter felt heavy in her hands as she dropped it into the mailbox. She'd found Jason's last known address online, not even bothering to double-check it. It didn't matter if he received it. What mattered was that she'd finally said the words she'd been holding inside for too long. "That's that," she said quietly, before turning and walking toward the bookstore, unaware that the address she'd written was no longer correct, that Jason had moved away months ago. In the penthouse suite of the Aurora building, Elian Thorne stared out at the city skyline, coffee in hand. At 30, he was one of the youngest CEOs in the country, heading Thorne Enterprises, a company that owned everything from tech startups to publishing houses. But success felt hollow since losing his brother, Michael, in a car accident 18 months ago. Mr. Thorne, his assistant Rebecca, called from the doorway. "The board meeting is in 30 minutes and here's your mail." Elian nodded, taking the small stack of envelopes. Most were business-related, but one caught his eye. A simple white envelope with handwritten address, no return information. Something about the slightly trembling handwriting made him pause. Back in his office, after a meeting that had dragged on too long, Elian picked up the mysterious envelope. It was addressed to a Jason McIntyre, but had been delivered to his penthouse. Instead, he should have written "return to sender" and put it back in the mail. Instead, he found himself carefully opening it. The letter inside was several pages long, the handwriting elegant but emotional, some words pressed harder into the paper than others, a few spots where the ink had blurred. He began to read. With each word, Elian felt as if someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. This woman, Camille, had poured her heart onto these pages. Her pain mirrored his own in so many ways, though the circumstances were different. The letter spoke of betrayal, of unanswered questions, of trying to rebuild a life that had shattered overnight. When he reached the end, he set the pages down and walked to the window, unsettled by how deeply her words had affected him. "I shouldn't have read this," he murmured. But he couldn't unread it, and something about her voice on the page had reached a part of him that had been numb for too long. Before he could reconsider, Elian sat at his desk and pulled out a piece of stationery. He picked up a pen, hesitated, then began to write, "You don't know me, but your words found me, and I think I was meant to read them. Your letter arrived at my address by mistake. It was meant for someone else, someone who doesn't deserve the grace with which you've said goodbye. I shouldn't have opened it. I certainly shouldn't be writing back. But something in your words, the way you described feeling half alive, going through motions, wondering if joy would ever feel real again. It was like reading my own thoughts on the page. I won't pretend to understand exactly what you've been through, but I do understand grief and rebuilding, and the strange, lonely feeling of being surrounded by people and yet completely unseen. If you want to write back, you can use this address. If not, I understand. Either way, thank you for reminding me that even strangers can sometimes see us more clearly than the people we think know us best. He didn't sign it. Just addressed an envelope to Camille at the return address she'd included and asked his assistant to mail it before he could change his mind. "Any interesting books come in?" asked Martha, the owner of Turning Pages, as Camille arranged a new display near the front window. "A few mysteries and that romance series everyone's been asking about," Camille replied, smiling. At 28, she'd once dreamed of opening her own bookstore. After Jason left, she'd put those dreams aside, grateful just to work among books that offered escape when reality became too much. Martha studied her with motherly concern. "You look tired, dear. Everything okay?" "Just couldn't sleep last night," Camille said with a shrug. She hadn't told anyone about the letter, not even her best friend, Emma. It felt too personal, too raw. The day passed in its usual peaceful rhythm, helping customers find the perfect book, ringing up purchases, organizing shelves. Camille loved the smell of books, the quiet conversations, the way regular customers would update her on their lives between purchases. When she arrived home that evening, she checked her mailbox out of habit. Bills, a catalogue, and a cream-colored envelope with her name written in a strong, elegant hand. No return name, just an address she didn't recognize in the expensive part of the city. Inside her apartment, Camille turned the envelope over in her hands before carefully opening it. As she read the short note inside, her heart began to pound. Someone had received her letter to Jason, a stranger, and they'd read her most private thoughts, her pain laid bare on the page. She should have been angry, embarrassed. Instead, she found herself reading the note again, struck by the honesty in the words. Whoever this person was, they understood exactly how she felt. There was no pity in their response, no empty reassurances, just recognition. Camille sat at her kitchen table for a long time, the note in her hands. Finally, she pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. "I should probably be upset that you read a letter that wasn't meant for you. But truthfully, it wasn't really meant for him either. It was meant for me, a way to finally say the things I've kept inside for too long. You're right about feeling half alive. Some days I catch myself laughing at something, and it surprises me like I've forgotten what it feels like to be genuinely happy. Does that sound strange? The bookstore where I work has become my sanctuary. Books don't leave. They don't make promises they can't keep. You mentioned grief. I'm sorry for whatever loss has touched your life. Sometimes I think we're all just walking around with invisible wounds, trying to hide them from each other. I don't know why I'm writing back to a stranger. Maybe because you don't know me. You don't see me as poor Camille, who got left before her wedding. You just see the words on a page. If you want to write again, you can. No pressure either way. Camille." She mailed the letter the next morning, telling herself it was probably foolish. Who starts a correspondence with a complete stranger? But something about the anonymous exchange felt safe, like she could be completely honest without fear of judgment. 2 weeks and several letters later, Camille found herself looking forward to checking her mail each day. The stranger, who still hadn't shared his name, had a way of asking questions that made her think, of sharing observations about life that resonated deeply with her. She'd learned he'd lost his brother, that he worked too much, that he also found solace in books. She'd told him about her job at the bookstore, her abandoned dreams of writing, her gradual process of rediscovering herself after Jason. "Earth to Camille," Emma said, waving a hand in front of her face. They were having lunch at their favorite cafe, and Camille had drifted off mid-conversation. "Where'd you go just now?" "Sorry," Camille said, taking a sip of her iced tea. "Just thinking about work." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Uh-huh. Is work making you smile like that? Because if arranging romance novels is suddenly that exciting, I need to reconsider my career choices." Camille laughed. "It's nothing. Really." "You seem different lately," Emma said, studying her. "In a good Way more like your old self. Before Camille could respond, Emma's phone buzzed. It's work, she said with a sigh, checking the message. There's exciting news. That big publishing house, Aurora Books, is looking for independent bookstores to partner with for some huge marketing campaign. Turning Pages is on their shortlist. That's amazing, Camille said. Martha must be thrilled. She is. Apparently some hotshot executives are coming to check out the store next week. We need to make sure everything is perfect. Emma worked part-time at Turning Pages too when she wasn't teaching at the local elementary school. I'll help, Camille promised, already thinking about displays they could create. Any boost in business would be good for Martha, who had been struggling to compete with online retailers. That evening, Camille found another letter waiting in her mailbox. She opened it eagerly, curling up on her couch to read. Your last letter made me think about something my brother used to say, that we never really see ourselves clearly. We're either too critical or wearing rose-colored glasses. Sometimes we need someone else's perspective to understand our own worth. I think that's why I found myself looking forward to your letters. You see things in a way that makes me see them differently too. Do you ever wonder if some mistakes are actually redirections? If the things that hurt us most are somehow guiding us toward where we're supposed to be? I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Before, I was just going through the motions at work, at home, everywhere. These letters, this connection with someone who doesn't know my history or my title or anything except the words I choose to share, it's woken something up in me. I should tell you something. My company is working with a bookstore in Millfield on a new project. I wonder sometimes if our paths might cross without us knowing it. Isn't it strange to think we might walk right past each other, completely unaware? At the bottom of the letter was something new, not a signature, but a printed photograph of the first page of Camille's original letter with a handwritten note beside it. I carry this with me every day. Camille's hands trembled slightly. His company was working with a bookstore in Millfield. Could it be Turning Pages? And he carried her words with him? For the first time, she wondered who this stranger really was, and what would happen if they ever did meet face to face. Everything looks perfect, Martha said, surveying the freshly arranged displays at Turning Pages. If these Aurora Books, people aren't impressed, they're blind. Camille adjusted a stack of bestsellers and stepped back to admire their work. The small bookstore had never looked better. Every shelf dusted, every book perfectly aligned, colorful posters announcing upcoming releases. She and Emma had stayed late 3 nights in a row to prepare for today's visit. What time are they coming? Camille asked, straightening her blue blouse. For some reason she felt nervous, though she told herself it was just excitement for Martha's. Zach, around 11, Martha replied, checking her watch. Which gives us just enough time for coffee. Emma's bringing some from next door. As if on cue, Emma pushed through the door, balancing a tray of coffee cups. Liquid courage, she announced, handing them around, and some intel. I just overheard someone at the cafe saying the CEO himself might be coming. Elian Thorne. The Elian Thorne. Martha's eyes widened. I thought they'd just send some marketing people. Apparently he's taking a personal interest in this project, Emma said. My friend at the newspaper says he's been changing how Thorne Enterprises operates since his brother died, getting more involved in the creative side of things. Camille half listened to their conversation, her mind drifting to the latest letter from her anonymous correspondent. She'd been carrying it in her pocket all morning, rereading it when no one was looking. The thought that he might work with Turning Pages had kept her awake last night. What were the odds? There were several bookstores in Millfield. Camille, hello. Emma waved a hand in front of her face. You're doing it again. That dreamy look. I asked if you could handle the register this morning while Martha and I talked to the executives. Oh yes, of course, Camille said quickly. Sorry, I was just thinking about the display for the children's section. Emma gave her a suspicious look but didn't press further. At precisely 11 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed. Martha straightened her jacket and moved forward to greet the visitors, a tall woman in a sharp pantsuit, a young man with glasses and a tablet, and behind them, a figure that made Camille freeze mid-motion. He was taller than the others, with broad shoulders and dark hair cut in an expensive style. He wore no tie with his suit, giving him a slightly more approachable look than his companions, but there was no mistaking the authority in his stance. This had to be Elian Thorne. Camille watched from behind the counter as Martha led the group toward the back of the store where they had set up a small meeting area. She couldn't explain why, but something about Elian Thorne seemed oddly familiar, though she was certain they'd never met. "Miss Drew?" The woman in the pantsuit had approached the counter while Camille was distracted. "Your name tag says Camille Drew, correct?" "Yes, that's me," Camille replied, surprised. "Rebecca Chen, Chief Marketing Officer at Aurora Books." She held out a sleek business card. "We'd like you to join our discussion if you don't mind." "Mrs. Wilson mentioned you're responsible for most of the display designs and community outreach." "Oh, yes, but perfect. Bring your ideas." Rebecca's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Feeling suddenly self-conscious, Camille touched her name tag, a handwritten one Martha had insisted they all wear for the meeting, and followed Rebecca to the back room. Elian Thorne was having trouble concentrating. The meeting had started well enough. Martha Wilson was exactly the kind of passionate, independent bookstore owner Aurora Books wanted to partner with. Her assistant, Emma, had impressive ideas about connecting with local schools. But since spotting the young woman at the register, he'd found his attention drifting. There was something about her that caught his interest, something in the graceful way she moved, the thoughtful expression on her face as she arranged books. He'd been about to ask Rebecca who she was when his CMO had taken the initiative to invite her to join them. "This is Camille Drew," Rebecca was saying. "She handles many of the creative elements here at Turning Pages." Camille. The name hit him like a physical force. It couldn't be, could it? How many Camilles could there be in a town the size of Millfield? "It's nice to meet you, Miss Drew," he said, extending his hand, studying her more carefully now. Her chestnut hair fell in soft waves around a face that seemed both strong and gentle. Her eyes, a deep, warm brown, held a hint of shyness, but met his directly. "Likewise, Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice soft but clear as she shook his hand. Elian found himself looking at her name tag, and the air seemed to vanish from his lungs. The handwriting. He would recognize it anywhere after weeks of reading and rereading her letters. The same elegant script with that distinctive way of forming capital letters. This was his Camille. The woman whose words had pulled him back to life, and she had no idea who he was. "Mr. Thorne?" Martha's voice broke through his shock. "What do you think of our community reading program idea?" He cleared his throat. "It sounds promising. Would you excuse me for a moment? I need to make a quick call." In the small office Martha had offered for privacy, Elian leaned against the desk, trying to steady himself. What were the odds? Out of all the bookstores in Millfield, his team had selected the very one where she worked. It felt like fate, or a cruel joke. She would hate him if she knew. He'd read her most private thoughts without permission, kept his identity hidden, let her believe he was just some random person who'd received her letter by mistake. Not the CEO of a major corporation who could have, should have, returned her misdirected mail weeks ago. He pulled out his wallet and carefully removed the folded page he'd been carrying. The first page of her letter to Jason, the one where she spoke about rebuilding herself piece by piece. What should he do now? Tell her the truth? Never reveal himself? Continue their correspondence as if nothing had changed? Before he could decide, there was a soft knock at the door. "Mr. Thorne?" It was her voice. "Martha asked me to see if you need anything." Elian hastily tucked the letter back into his wallet. "Just finished my call," he said, opening the door. "And please call me Elian." Camille nodded, a polite smile on her lips. But something caught her eye. A small piece of paper that had fallen to the floor when he'd put away his wallet. "You dropped this," she said, bending to pick it up. Elian felt his heart stop as she looked at the scrap of paper in her hand, a corner torn from her original letter, with just a few words visible in her unmistakable handwriting. Camille stared at the fragment of paper in her hand, a strange sensation washing over her. The handwriting was her own, she was certain of it, though she couldn't recall what this particular note might have been. Just a few words were visible. "Wondering why I wasn't—" "Thank you," Elian said quickly, taking it from her with an unreadable expression. "Just a note to myself." But it wasn't. Camille knew her own handwriting, and those words, they were from her letter to Jason. The letter that had found its way to... She looked up at Elian Thorne with new eyes studying his face. Was it possible? The timing fit. Aurora Books was part of Thorne Enterprises. He'd mentioned his company was working with a bookstore in Millfield. "We should get back to the meeting," Elian said, his voice carefully controlled. Camille nodded, following him out of the office in a daze. Throughout the rest of the discussion, she found herself watching him. The way he spoke, how he listened intently to Martha's ideas, the thoughtful questions he asked. Was this the man who had been writing to her? The one who carried her words with him? After the meeting concluded, Elian approached her while the others were distracted with paperwork. "You have a wonderful store here," he said, "and your display ideas are impressive." "Thank you," she replied, searching his face for any sign, any confirmation of her suspicion. "I was wondering," he continued, his voice dropping slightly, "if you might show me some of your favorite sections? I'm always looking for book recommendations." As Camille led him through the store, pointing out hidden gems and customer favorites, she found herself growing more certain. There was something in the way he spoke about books, the same thoughtfulness she'd found in those anonymous letters. "Mystery or romance?" he asked suddenly. The question mirrored one from his third letter to her, where he'd asked about her reading. "Preferences, both," she answered carefully, watching his reaction. "Sometimes the best stories have elements of each." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I've come to think the same recently." They reached the poetry section, tucked in a quiet corner of the store. Elian picked up a slim volume, flipping through it with careful hands. "Do you know this one?" he asked, showing her the cover, a collection by Mary Oliver. "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" Camille quoted softly. Something flashed in his eyes. Recognition. She'd included that quote in one of her letters. Before she could say anything more, Rebecca appeared at the end of the aisle. "Elian, we need to finalize some details before we leave." He nodded, then turned back to Camille. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Ms. Drew." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, scribbling something on the back before handing it to her. "If you think of any other ideas for the partnership, please don't hesitate to reach out directly." Camille took the card, her fingers brushing against his. Only after he'd walked away did she turn it over to read what he'd written on the back. In strong, elegant handwriting, the same handwriting from the letters she'd been receiving, were the words, "You don't know me, but your words found me." That evening, Camille sat at her kitchen table, Elian's business card in one hand and his latest letter in the other. There was no doubt now, the handwriting matched perfectly. Elian Thorne was her anonymous correspondent. The CEO of Thorne Enterprises had been writing to her for weeks, sharing his grief over his brother, his thoughts on rebuilding a life, his growing connection to her words, and he had known who she was the moment he saw her name tag at the store. Emotions tumbled through her. Confusion, embarrassment, anger, and something else she wasn't ready to name. Why hadn't he said anything during the meeting? Why continue the charade? She remembered the way he'd quickly taken back that scrap of her letter, the careful way he'd tested her with that poetry book, the message he'd left on his business card. He wanted her to know, but he was afraid. Afraid of what, though? That she'd be angry, that she'd feel betrayed, or that the connection they'd built through their letters would crumble in the harsh light of reality. Camille picked up her phone and typed in the direct number Elian had written on his card. Her finger hovered over the call button, but she couldn't bring herself to press it. What would she even say? Instead, she pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write, "I know who you are now. I saw my handwriting on that paper you dropped today. I recognized your handwriting on the business card." "Why? Didn't you tell me? All this time you knew exactly who I was, where I worked. You walked into my bookstore today and pretended we were strangers meeting for the first time. I feel foolish, exposed. I told you things I've never told anyone, thinking you were just some anonymous person who'd received my letter by mistake. But you're Elian Thorne. You own half the publishing houses in the country. You could probably buy our entire bookstore with what you spend on coffee in a year. Was this amusing for you? Some kind of game? I thought our letters meant something. Real. Now I don't know what to think. She signed it simply C and addressed an envelope to the penthouse address she'd been using. She wouldn't mail it tonight. She needed time to think, to process everything that had happened. As she placed the letter and envelope on her bedside table, her phone rang. Unknown number. Her heart jumped to her throat as she answered. Camille. His voice was instantly recognizable. It's Elian Thorne. I think we need to talk. Elian stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, phone in hand, watching the city lights below. He hadn't planned to call her tonight. He'd intended to send another letter, explaining everything, giving her space to respond in her own time. But the memory of her expression when she'd seen that fragment of her letter, the flash of recognition, in her eyes, had haunted him all afternoon. She knew, or at least suspected, and he couldn't bear the thought of her believing, even for one night, that he'd been playing some cruel game. I should have told you today, he said into the phone, the words rushing out before she could speak. When I realized who you were, but I was afraid. Afraid of what? Her voice was quiet, guarded. That you'd hate me for reading your letter, for not telling you who I was from the beginning. He paused, searching for the right words. That what we've shared these past weeks would somehow change once you knew who I really am. And who are you, really? The question hung in the air between them. Because the Elian in those letters feels very different from Elian Thorne, CEO. They're both me, he said softly. But the man in those letters is more me than the one who sits in boardrooms. That's what your words did, Camille. They helped me find parts of myself I thought I'd lost when Michael died. There was silence on the other end, and for a moment he thought she might have hung up. Then she spoke, her voice a little stronger. I need time to process this, Elian. Today has been overwhelming. I understand. Take all the time you need. He hesitated, then added, but please know that everything I wrote to you was true, every word. After they said goodbye, Elian remained by the window, replaying their brief conversation. Had he made a mistake in calling? Should he have waited for her to reach out first? On his desk lay the draft of the letter he'd been planning to send her, pages of explanation, of apology, of hope. Beside it was a folder containing the partnership agreement with Turning Pages Bookstore. Aurora Books would be working closely with them for at least 6 months. 6 months during which he and Camille would inevitably cross paths again and again. The question was, would those encounters be purely professional from now on? Or could they somehow find their way back to the honest connection they'd built through their letters? Elian picked up the photograph he kept on his desk. Himself and Michael at a sailing competition 2 years ago, both laughing into the camera, arms around each other's shoulders. The last picture they'd taken together. You'd tell me I'm overthinking this, he said to his brother's image. So you'd say just be honest with her, dummy. The photograph offered no response, but Elian felt a sense of clarity nonetheless. He would give Camille the space she needed, but he wouldn't give up on whatever was growing between them. Something that had started with a misdirected letter, but had become so much more. On the other side of town, Camille sat on her couch, rereading all of Elian's letters by lamplight. His voice on the phone had matched the voice in these pages, thoughtful, honest, a little sad. Not at all what she would have expected from someone in his position. The last letter lay open on her lap, with the photo of her handwriting and his. Note, I carry this with me, every day. Despite her confusion, despite the questions swirling in her mind, something warm unfurled in her chest at the thought. Her words had found him when they both needed someone to understand their pain. Was that just random chance or something more like fate? She didn't know yet how she felt about Elian Thorne, CEO. But the man who had written these letters, him she wanted to know better. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Turning Pages as Camille rearranged a display of new releases. 3 days had passed since her phone call with Elian, and she still hadn't decided how to feel about the situation. She'd spent hours analyzing every letter, every word they'd exchanged, wondering if she'd been naive or if their connection was genuine. There's a delivery for you, Emma called from the front counter, interrupting Camille's thoughts. A young courier handed Camille a small rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. No return address, but she didn't need one to know who it was. From a sofa, secret admirer, Emma teased, watching with curious eyes. Just something I ordered, Camille lied, tucking the package into her bag. I'll open it later. Throughout her shift, Camille was acutely aware of the package in her bag, like it was giving off heat. Only when she was finally alone in her apartment did she carefully unwrap it. Inside was a first edition of Mary Oliver's poetry collection, the same one Elian had shown her in the store, and a handwritten note. Camille, I know you asked for time, and I respect that, but I wanted you to have this. When I read your first letter, I was at my lowest point since losing Michael. Your words reminded me that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story. I've spent the past 2 years running a company I never wanted to run, living a life that was supposed to be my brother's. Your letters were the first thing that felt real, to me in a long time. I understand if you can't forgive the way our paths crossed, but I hope you'll give me a chance to show you that the man who wrote those letters is the real me, not the CEO you met at the bookstore. Elian P. The Aurora Books partnership is entirely legitimate and was in motion weeks before I knew you worked at Turning Pages. Rebecca selected your store based on Martha's reputation and the community engagement programs. I don't want you to ever think I used my position to manipulate our meeting. Camille traced her fingers over the words, feeling the indentations on the paper. She opened the book and found that he had marked a page with a pressed flower, a forget-me-not. The poem was titled The Journey, about finding the courage to save one's own life. Her phone rang, startling her. It was Martha. Camille, dear, I'm sorry to bother you after hours, but I just got off the phone with Rebecca Chen from Aurora Books. They want to fast-track our partnership and need us to come to their offices tomorrow for a planning meeting. I was hoping you could join me, since you had such wonderful ideas. Camille's heart jumped. Their offices, you mean at Thorn Enterprises? Yes, the main building downtown. Emma can't make it. She has parent-teacher conferences all day. I really need you there if you can manage it. After hanging up, Camille sat beside her window watching the streetlights flicker on as dusk settled over Millfield. She'd have to face Elian again tomorrow, in his territory this time. The thought both excited and terrified her. She picked up the poetry book again, reading the marked poem more carefully. One line stood out. Little by little, you began to leave the old story behind. Wasn't that what she'd been trying to do with that first letter to Jason? Leave the old story behind? With sudden decision, Camille reached for her phone and typed a text message to the number Elian had called from. Thank you for the book. The poem you marked, it's perfect. And yes, I'll give us a chance to start a new story. The Thorn Enterprises. Building dominated the Millfield skyline. 40 stories of glass and steel that caught the morning light like a beacon. Camille smoothed her navy blue dress as she and Martha were escorted to the elevator by a security guard. I still can't believe. Elian Thorne himself is overseeing this project, Martha whispered as they ascended to the 38th floor. Rebecca says he never gets involved at this level. Camille just nodded, not trusting herself to comment without giving something away. She'd barely slept last night after sending that text. Elian had replied with a simple, "Thank you. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow." The elevator doors opened to reveal a sleek reception area where Rebecca Chen waited to greet them. "Mrs. Wilson, Ms. Drew, welcome to Aurora Books," she said, leading them down a corridor lined with framed book covers. "We're meeting in the main conference room. Everyone's already here." "Everyone?" Camille asked, suddenly nervous. "The creative team, marketing, digital, and Mr. Thorne, of course." The conference room was filled with people in business attire, all seated around a massive table. Elian stood at the head, mid-sentence, but paused when they entered. His eyes found Camille's. Immediately. "Mrs. Wilson, Ms. Drew, please join us," he said, gesturing to 2 empty seats. The one nearest him was clearly meant for Martha, leaving Camille to sit across the table, directly in his line of sight. For the next hour, Camille tried to focus on the presentation about marketing strategies and community events. She took notes, asked questions, and offered suggestions when appropriate. But she was constantly aware of Elian's gaze, the way he seemed to be speaking directly to her, even when addressing the entire room. "We'd like to launch with a series of author events," Rebecca was saying. "Ms. Drew, I understand you have experience coordinating these." "Yes," Camille replied, grateful for the distraction. "We've found that pairing established authors with local writers creates a sense of community and drives sales for both." "Excellent point," Elian said. "Aurora Books has several authors who would be perfect for this approach. Perhaps Ms. Drew could review their profiles and suggest pairings." And just like that, she was assigned to work directly with him. After the meeting, as everyone filed out, Elian approached her. "Do you have a moment? I'd like to discuss the author program in more detail." Martha beamed at what she clearly saw as special attention from the CEO. "Of course she does. I'll wait in the lobby, dear." "Actually, Mrs. Wilson," Rebecca interjected smoothly, "I was hoping to show you our digital marketing platform. It might take a while. Perhaps Ms. Drew could catch a taxi back to the store later." Before Camille could object, Martha was whisked away, leaving her alone with Elian in the now empty conference room. "That was subtle," Camille said dryly. A smile tugged at the corner of Elian's mouth. "Rebecca excels at reading situations and creating opportunities. Does she know about the letters?" "No," he said quickly. "No one does. She just thinks I'm interested in you." The directness of his statement made Camille's cheeks warm. "And are you interested in me?" "I think you know the answer to that." Elian moved closer, his voice dropping. "But what I'm more concerned about is whether you're still angry with me." "I wasn't angry, exactly," Camille said, surprised to find it was true. "Confused, embarrassed, a little scared." "Scared?" His brow furrowed. "Of what?" "Of having shared so much of myself with someone who turns out to be you, Elian Thorne. It's intimidating." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture Camille was beginning to recognize as a sign of frustration. "That's exactly what I was afraid of, that once you knew who I was, everything would change." "Of course it changes things," she said, softly. "But that doesn't mean it changes how I feel about what we shared in those letters." Relief flickered across his face. "Have dinner with me tonight, not as CEO and bookstore clerk, just as Elian and Camille." She hesitated only a moment, before nodding. "Okay, but somewhere quiet, please, not anywhere fancy." "I know just the place," he promised. Rosa's Italian kitchen was nothing like the upscale restaurant Camille had expected. Tucked away on a side street downtown, it was small and homey, with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. "My brother and I used to come here all the time," Elian explained, as an elderly woman led them to a corner table. "Best lasagna in the state." "Elian, you don't visit enough," the woman scolded affectionately, patting his cheek. "And you brought a beautiful lady. Michael would approve." "Rosa, this is Camille," Elian said, a hint of shyness in his voice. "Camille, Rosa has been feeding the Thorne family for 20 years. Any friend of Elian's is family here," Rosa declared, squeezing Camille's hand warmly. "I'll bring you both the special, no arguments." As Rosa bustled away, Camille found herself relaxing for the first time all day. "She's wonderful. She helped raise us after our mother died," Elian said, a softness in his expression Camille hadn't seen before. "Our father was absent emotionally. Rosa made sure we knew what family felt like." "You miss him a lot, don't you? Your brother?" Elian nodded, his eyes growing distant. "Michael was the heart of our family. He was supposed to take over the company, not me. I was the creative one, always writing, dreaming up stories. I was running our publishing division while he handled the business side." "What happened?" Camille asked gently. "Car accident, drunk driver." His voice was flat, controlled. "He was on his way to meet me for dinner, actually. Right here. I waited 2 hours before I got the call." Camille reached across the table and took his hand without thinking. "I'm so sorry." He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her. "Face, it's strange. I haven't talked about this with anyone since it happened, but I wrote to you about it. It's easier sometimes with a stranger," she said. "Less history, less judgment." "But we're not strangers anymore," he pointed out, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "No, we're not," she agreed, feeling something warm unfurl in her chest. Though I still feel like I know the letter writer better than I know CEO Elian Thorne. They're the same person. But you're right. I've been living so much in my role these past 2 years that sometimes I forget who I really am. His eyes held hers. Your letters reminded me. Rosa returned with wine and bread, giving Camille a moment to collect herself. The intensity of Elian's gaze was almost overwhelming. Throughout dinner, the conversation flowed more easily than Camille had expected. They talked about books they loved, places they wanted to visit, memories of growing up in Millfield. Elian had moved away for college, but returned after his brother's death to run the company. So what happened? Elian asked as they shared a tiramisu. With Jason, I mean. Your letter said he left, but not why. Camille tensed slightly, then sighed. I don't actually know, not really. He just disappeared 3 weeks before the wedding. Left a note saying he couldn't go through with it, and that he was sorry for the pain he was causing. He never explained, never called. Nope, just gone. She pushed the dessert around with her fork. I found out later from mutual friends that he'd moved to California. Apparently he'd been planning it for months, had a job lined up and everything. He just didn't bother to include me in those plans. What a coward, Elian said with unexpected heat. To not even give you the respect of an explanation. That's the worst part, I think. Not knowing if it was something I did or if he just stopped loving me. She gave a small, sad smile. Hence the letter you received. 2 years of questions, with no answers. I'm glad he never got that letter, Elian said quietly. He didn't deserve your words. The simplicity of his statement warmed her more than any elaborate declaration could have. For the first time since Jason had left, Camille felt truly seen, not as someone to be pitied, but as someone worthy of better treatment than she'd received. After dinner, Elian insisted on driving her home, though she protested it was unnecessary. Old-fashioned manners, he explained with a shrug. My mother's influence. His car was expensive but understated, not the flashy sports car she might have expected from someone in his position. As they pulled up outside her apartment building, an awkward silence fell between them. Thank you for tonight, Camille said finally. It was nice. Nice. Elian raised an eyebrow, a hint of teasing in his voice. That's rather bland praise, she laughed, the tension breaking. Okay, it was wonderful, but also terrifying. Terrifying? He turned in his seat to face her. Why? Because this feels important, she admitted, looking down at her hands. Whatever this is between us, it feels significant, and that scares me. Elian reached out, gently tilting her chin up until she met his eyes. It scares me too, he confessed, but some things are worth being scared for. For a moment, Camille thought he might kiss her. Instead, he took her hand and pressed his lips to her palm, a gesture so unexpectedly tender that it brought tears to her eyes. Good night, Camille, he said softly, releasing her hand. I'll see you tomorrow at the bookstore. Spill it, Emma demanded the next morning, cornering Camille in the break room at Turning Pages. Martha says you had a private meeting with Elian Thorne yesterday and didn't come back to the store. What's going on? Nothing's going on, Camille insisted, feeling her cheeks betray her with a blush. We discussed the author program for the partnership, that's all. Uh-huh, and that's why you're blushing and why Martha says he's coming here personally today to follow up. Emma crossed her arms. Come on, Cam. We've been friends for years. You can tell me. Before Camille could respond, Martha burst into the break room, her face flushed with excitement. He's here, and he brought coffee for everyone. Actual expensive coffee, not the break room stuff. Sure enough, Elian stood by the front counter, chatting easily with a customer while balancing a tray of coffee cups. He wore casual clothes today, dark jeans and a grey sweater that made him look more like the man who wrote those letters and less like the CEO of a major corporation. His face brightened when he spotted Camille, a change so subtle that only someone watching closely would notice. Good morning, he said, offering her a cup. I remembered you mentioned liking hazelnut. You remembered that? It had been a small detail in one of her letters, mentioning the comfort of hazelnut coffee on rainy days. I remember everything you've told me, he said quietly, before turning to include Emma and Martha in the conversation. I brought the author profiles we discussed yesterday. Perhaps we could review them together. Emma shot Camille a knowing look, but said nothing as Martha ushered them toward the reading nook in the back of the store. For the next hour, they discussed potential events and marketing strategies, Elian deferring to Camille's ideas more often than not. "You'll need to visit our offices again next week," he told Martha. "Our design team wants to show you the promotional materials." "Oh dear, I can't," Martha fretted. "My sister's coming to town. What about you, Emma?" "Parent-teacher conferences all week," Emma said quickly. Too quickly, Camille thought suspiciously. "I suppose Camille will have to go," Martha concluded, not looking at all disappointed by this turn of events. Later, as Elian was preparing to leave, he paused beside Camille, who was arranging a display near the front window. "Was that as transparent as it seemed?" he asked with amusement. "Completely," Camille confirmed, fighting a smile. "I think they're matchmaking. Do you mind?" His voice was casual, but his eyes were serious. "I should," she admitted. "It's complicated and probably unwise and definitely happening too fast. But no, I don't mind." Relief softened his features. "Good, because I'd like to see you again. Outside of work meetings." "I'd like that too," she said softly. As Elian left the store, Emma appeared at Camille's side like she'd been waiting just out of earshot. "Okay, now you have to tell me what's going on." "The CEO of Thorn Enterprises doesn't personally bring coffee to business meetings at small bookstores, and he doesn't look at business associates the way he looks at you." Camille hesitated, then made a decision. Emma was her best friend. If anyone would understand, it would be her. "It's a long story," she said with a sigh. "Remember that letter I wrote to Jason a few weeks ago? The closure letter? You finally sent it?" "I did, but it never reached him. It went to Elian instead." Emma's eyes widened as Camille explained everything. The misdirected letter, the anonymous correspondence, the moment of recognition at their first meeting. "That's wow," Emma said when Camille finished. "That's like something out of a movie or a book. I know it sounds crazy." "No, it sounds romantic," Emma corrected her. "But Cam, are you sure about this? After what happened with Jason, I'm not sure about anything," Camille admitted. "But I feel more like myself with him than I have in years. The way he understands me, it's like he sees parts of me that no one else does." "Because of the letters?" "Maybe. Or maybe the letters just gave us a chance to know each other without all the usual barriers." She shrugged helplessly. "I can't explain it. I just know there's something real here." Emma squeezed her hand. "Then I'm happy for you. Just be careful with your heart, okay? Rich, powerful men are used to getting what they want. He's not like that," Camille said confidently. "The man in those letters, that's the real Elian, not the CEO everyone sees." "I hope you're right," Emma said. "For what it's worth, he does seem genuinely interested in you, not just sleeping with the bookstore clerk," Camille suggested dryly. "You know what I mean," Emma protested. "There's a lot at stake here, your heart, your job, this partnership with Aurora Books. Just make sure you're seeing things clearly." It was good advice, Camille knew. But as she went through the motions of her workday, all she could think about was the way Elian had looked at her, the way he'd listened to her ideas, the gentle press of his lips against her palm. Was she seeing things clearly, or was she falling into another fantasy, creating a version of Elian Thorn that matched the man in those thoughtful, heartfelt letters? The answer would have to wait. For now, she had a partnership to help plan, and a heart that, despite her best efforts to protect it, was already beginning to hope again. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as the partnership between Turning Pages and Aurora Books took shape. Camille found herself splitting her time between the bookstore and the Thorn Enterprises offices, attending meetings and helping to plan the launch event, a literary gala that would bring authors and readers together at the newly renovated Millfield Library. In those busy days, her relationship with Elian evolved in quiet moments stolen between meetings, coffees in his office, lunch at small cafes where no one recognized him, text messages that continued the honest exchanges they'd begun in their letters. "You look happy," Martha observed one afternoon as Camille arranged a window display featuring authors from Aurora Books. "Happier than I've seen you in a long time." "I am happy," Camille admitted, surprised to realize how true it was. The heavy cloud of sadness that had followed her since Jason left had lifted, replaced by a sense of possibility she'd almost forgotten. After closing the store that evening, Camille found Elian waiting outside, leaning against his car with casual elegance. He'd taken to driving her home most nights, extending their time together with conversations that often lasted for hours. "I have a surprise for you," he said as they pulled away from the curb. "If you're up for an adventure." "What kind of adventure?" she asked, intrigued by the hint of mischief in his eyes. "It's a perfect night for stargazing." He reached into the back seat and produced a picnic basket. "I know a spot just outside town where the sky is incredible." An hour later, they sat on a blanket spread across the hood of his car, a thermos of hot chocolate between them, looking up at a vast canopy of stars. The spot Elian had chosen was on a hill overlooking Millfield, far enough from the city lights to see the brilliant scatter of the Milky Way. "My brother and I used to come here as teenagers," Elian said, his voice soft with memory. "Michael would bring his girlfriend of the moment, and I'd bring a notebook. I'd write stories while they'd—" He chuckled. "Well, you can imagine. You were the third wheel." Camille smiled, trying to picture a teenage Elian scribbling stories under the stars. Chronic third wheel. "I was always more comfortable with words than with people." He took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "Until recently." The simple touch sent warmth spreading through her. Over the past weeks, they'd shared countless conversations, but had been cautious with physical affection. A brush of hands, a kiss on the cheek, his arm around her shoulders as they walked. Camille sensed Elian was letting her set the pace, waiting for her to be ready for more. "I found some of my old notebooks yesterday," he continued. "Stories I wrote before college, before the business degree my father insisted on." "What kind of stories?" She turned to look at him, fascinated by this glimpse of his younger self. "Adventures, mostly. Fantasy worlds where ordinary people discovered they had extraordinary gifts." He looked slightly embarrassed. "Cliched stuff, but it was my escape." "Do you still write? Besides letters to strangers, I mean," she teased gently. "Not in years. The company takes all my time." There was regret in his voice. "Another thing I lost when Michael died." Camille squeezed his hand. "Maybe you could start again. It's never too late to reclaim the things that make you happy." He looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Is that what you're doing, Camille? Reclaiming your happiness?" "I'm trying," she admitted. "For a long time after Jason left, I was just surviving, going through the motions. I stayed in Millfield, kept the same job, the same apartment. It was like I was afraid to change anything in case I lost even more of myself. And now I'm remembering who I was before him, who I wanted to be." She smiled. "The bookstore was supposed to be temporary, just a job until I figured out what came next. But I fell in love with it, with helping people find stories that speak to them." "You're good at it," Elian said. "I've watched you with customers. You have a gift for connecting people with exactly the book they need." "Martha's talking about retiring in a few years," Camille said, voicing a thought she'd barely allowed herself to consider. "Sometimes I wonder if I could buy the store from her, make it truly mine." Elian sat up straighter, his expression brightening. "You'd be amazing at that. Have you talked to her about it?" "Not yet. It feels too soon, and anyway—" She hesitated. "I don't know if I could afford it." "If it's something you really want, there are ways," Elian began, but Camille shook her head. "Please don't offer to help me buy it," she said firmly. "That's not why I told you." His expression softened with understanding. "I know, but for the record, I wasn't going to offer money. I was going to suggest talking to our small business development team. They help local businesses secure fair loans all the time." "Oh." She felt a twinge of embarrassment for assuming. "I'm sorry. It's just, you don't want our relationship to be about my money or position," he finished for her. "I understand that better than you might think, Camille. Most people in my life want something from me. It's refreshing to be with someone who just wants me." The simple honesty in his words moved her deeply. For the first time, she truly understood his hesitation in revealing his identity to her. Not just fear of her anger, but fear of losing the genuine connection they'd formed through their letters. Impulsively, Camille leaned forward and kissed him. He responded immediately, one hand moving to cradle her face with gentle reverence. The kiss deepened, stars forgotten as they finally gave in to the attraction that had been building between them for weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Elian rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I first read your letter," he confessed. Camille laughed softly. "That would have been a bit forward, don't you think?" "Dear stranger, I read your misdirected mail and now I'd like to kiss you?" "When you put it that way, it does sound slightly inappropriate," he agreed with a chuckle before kissing her again. Later, as they lay side by side on the blanket, hands intertwined, Elian said quietly, "I'm falling in love with you, Camille." "Drew, I think I started falling the moment I read your words." The declaration hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Camille felt her heart race, fear and hope battling within her. After Jason, she'd promised herself she'd be more careful, more guarded. But here was Elian offering his heart with the same honesty he'd shown in his letters. "I'm scared," she admitted. "The last time I gave someone my heart, he returned it. Broken. I would never hurt you like that," Elian promised, turning to face her. "But I understand your fear. We can take this as slowly as you need." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the curve of his jaw with her fingertips. "I'm falling. In love with you too," she whispered. "And that terrifies me." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, the gesture that had become his signature, simple yet intimate. "Then we'll be terrified together." The night of the literary gala arrived, transforming the historic Millfield Library into a glittering celebration of books and the people who loved them. Authors mingled with readers, local writers shared the spotlight with nationally recognized names, and at the center of it all was the partnership between Turning Pages and Aurora. Books. Camille wore a simple emerald green dress that Emma had insisted she buy for the occasion. "If you're going to be on the arm of Millfield's most eligible bachelor, you need to look the part," her friend had declared during their shopping trip. "I'm not going to be on his arm," Camille had protested. "This is a professional event. We're keeping our relationship private." But as she descended the library's grand staircase and saw Elian waiting at the bottom, his eyes lighting up at the sight of her, she knew their secret wouldn't last the night. No one could miss the way he looked. At her, like she was the only person in the room. "For you take my breath away," he said quietly when she reached him, offering his arm. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she replied, taking in his perfectly tailored suit. "Very CEO-like," he laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment, though I'd rather be in jeans and a sweater with you at Rosa's." "Later," she promised. "First, we have a partnership to celebrate." The evening progressed smoothly. Speeches were given, contracts ceremonially signed, champagne toasts offered to the future of literature in Millfield. Martha beamed with pride as Turning Pages was celebrated as a cornerstone of the community. Rebecca Chen expertly managed the press, ensuring the partnership received the attention it deserved. As the formal program ended and guests began to mingle more freely, Camille found herself approached by a tall, familiar figure that made her blood run cold. Jason McIntyre had barely changed in 2 years, still handsome in a conventional way, still carrying himself with the confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. He held a glass of champagne and wore an expression of pleasant surprise that Camille immediately distrusted. "Camille, I thought that was you," he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek as if they were old friends rather than ex-fiancés. "You look amazing, Jason." She managed to keep her voice steady. "What are you doing here?" "I'm back in town for my parents' anniversary," he explained. "Saw the announcement about this event in the local paper. When I realized Turning Pages was involved, I thought I'd stop by to support my favorite bookstore." "How thoughtful," she said flatly, fighting the urge to walk away. 2 years ago, this encounter would have devastated her. Now she was surprised to find she felt nothing but a dull irritation. "So, partnership with Aurora Books, that's big," Jason continued, oblivious to her discomfort. "You always said Turning Pages deserved more recognition." "Yes, well, Martha's worked hard for this opportunity." And you still just working at the bookstore? There was a hint of condescension in his voice that she'd somehow never noticed when they were together. I always thought you'd move on to something bigger. Before Camille could respond, a warm hand settled at the small of her back. There you are, Elian said, his voice pleasant but his eyes cool as they assessed Jason. I've been looking for you. The Aurora Books authors would like to meet the woman responsible for the community outreach program. Jason's eyes widened with recognition. You're Elian Thorne, he said, extending his hand. Jason McIntyre, I'm an old friend of Camille's. Is that what you call it? Camille murmured, too quietly for Jason to hear, but Elian's slight squeeze at her waist told her he'd caught her words. Mr. McIntyre, Elian acknowledged, shaking his hand briefly. If you'll excuse us, we have some guests waiting. Of course, Jason said, clearly impressed by the connection. Camille, we should catch up while I'm in town. Maybe coffee tomorrow. For old time's sake. Before she could answer, a striking brunette in a designer dress appeared at Jason's side, slipping her arm possessively through his. There you are, darling. You promised to introduce me to that publisher from New York. She glanced at Camille and Elian with polite disinterest. Melissa, this is Camille Drew, an old friend, Jason said smoothly, and Elian Thorne, CEO of Thorne. Enterprises. This is my fiancée, Melissa Cantwell. Fiancée. The word hit Camille with unexpected force, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. She felt nothing but mild curiosity and surprisingly relief. Congratulations, she said sincerely. It was nice seeing you, Jason, but we really do need to go. Enjoy the rest of your evening. As Elian guided her away, his hand steady at her, back, she felt a tension she hadn't realized she was carrying dissolve. For 2 years, she'd wondered what she would feel if she ever saw Jason again. Pain, anger, longing. The reality was so much simpler. Nothing. He was a stranger now. One who had once mattered but no longer did. Are you okay? Elian asked quietly when they were out of earshot. I'm fine, she said, surprised to find she meant it. Better than fine, actually. I think I needed that closure. Elian studied her face, concern evident in his eyes. You're sure? We can leave if you want. Absolutely not, she said firmly. This is our night, yours, mine, Martha's, turning pages. I'm not letting Jason McIntyre ruin another important moment in my life. A smile spread across Elian's face, pride and something deeper shining in his eyes. Have I told you lately how extraordinary you are? Not in the last hour, she teased, feeling lighter than she had in years. A serious oversight on my part, he said, taking her hand and leading her toward a quieter corner of the room. 1. I intend to rectify immediately. Before she could respond, he was kissing her, right there in the middle of the gala, surrounded by authors and publishers and the entire literary community of Millfield. It was a public declaration, one that would undoubtedly be noticed, but Camille found she didn't care. She kissed him back, letting the last ghosts of her past fade away. Across the room, Emma caught her eye and gave an exaggerated thumbs up, making Camille laugh against Elian's lips. So much for keeping our relationship private, she murmured. I'm tired of hiding how I feel about you, he said simply. Unless you'd rather we did. No, she decided, squeezing his hand. No more hiding. 6 months later, Camille stood in the renovated back room of Turning Pages, now transformed into a cozy event space for author readings and book clubs. The partnership with Aurora Books had been even more successful than anyone had anticipated, bringing new life and customers to the store. The new young adult section looks amazing, Emma said, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. Martha says registrations for the summer reading program are already double last year's numbers. I still can't believe she's letting me manage the expansion, Camille said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Opening a small cafe section was a big risk. A risk that's paying off, Emma pointed out, and it doesn't hurt that your boyfriend's company handled the financing with terms no other bank would match. Elian had nothing to do with that, Camille protested. I worked directly with the small business development team. He recused himself from the entire process. Emma held up her hands in surrender. I know. You've made that very clear. I'm just saying, it's worked out well for everyone. It had worked out well, Camille had to admit. Martha had officially named her assistant manager, with a clear path to ownership when Martha retired. The store was thriving, becoming the literary hub she'd always envisioned. And most surprisingly, she'd begun writing again, children's stories that she read at their weekly storytime events. "Speaking of your boyfriend," Emma said with a sly smile, "I heard a rumor that he's looking at real estate in Millfield. Actual houses, not more office buildings. Any idea why a confirmed bachelor who lives in a penthouse would suddenly be interested in houses with actual yards?" Camille felt her cheeks warm. "I wouldn't know," she said, though her hand instinctively moved to touch the small key that now hung on a chain around her neck, the key to Elian's penthouse given to her a month ago with a simple, "Whenever you want, for as long as you want." She hadn't fully moved in yet, but she spent more nights there than at her own apartment these days. And yes, they'd talked about finding a place that could be truly theirs, somewhere between his world and hers. "Uh-huh," Emma said, clearly not believing her. "Well, whatever's happening, you deserve it, Cam. After everything with Jason, it's good to see you so happy." "I am happy," Camille said, the words no longer a surprise, but a comfortable truth. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again." The bell above the door chimed, and Camille looked up to see Elian entering the store, a package tucked under his arm. He'd made a habit of stopping by turning pages on his way home from the office, sometimes to help shelve books, sometimes just to drive her home. "I'll make myself scarce," Emma said with a knowing smile, heading toward the front counter. Elian approached, his tie loosened and a weary smile on his face. "Long day at the office," he explained, kissing her hello, "but worth it to end it here with you." "Rough meeting?" she asked, straightening his tie automatically. "Budget conflicts, personality clashes, the usual corporate drama." He shrugged. "It off. Nothing that matters now. I brought you something." The package he handed her was wrapped in simple brown paper, similar to the one he'd used for the poetry book months ago. Camille unwrapped it carefully to reveal a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the soft leather. "Open it," he urged, an unusual note of nervousness in his voice. Inside, on the first page, Camille found his familiar handwriting. "Camille, 1 year ago today, a letter meant for someone else found its way to me instead. Fate, chance, or a postal worker's mistake. I'll never know for certain. What I do know is that your words changed the course of my life. In that first letter, you wrote about trying to let go of the past, about hoping to move forward. What you couldn't have known was that you were helping me do the same. I've watched you reclaim your dreams over these past months, taking a leadership role at the bookstore, writing your children's stories, planning for a future you once thought lost. You've inspired me to do the same, to remember the joy I once found in writing, to lead my company with heart instead of just duty, to build a life that honors my brother's memory without being trapped by grief. This journal is for our next chapter, the story we write together. On page 2, you'll find my suggestion for how that chapter might begin." With trembling fingers, Camille turned the page. There, pressed between the pages, was a forget-me-not, like the one he'd placed in the poetry book, and, beneath it, a simple question written in his elegant hand. "Will you marry me?" She looked up, tears blurring her vision, to find Elian watching her with hopeful eyes. From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a ring with a single perfect diamond surrounded by tiny sapphires. "I know it might seem fast," he said quietly, "but some stories don't need years to unfold. Sometimes you just know." Camille closed the journal, clutching it to her chest. "When I wrote that letter to Jason, I was trying to say goodbye to a past that was holding me back," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I never imagined it would lead me to a future brighter than anything I'd dreamed. Is that a yes?" Elian asked, a smile beginning to form. Instead of answering, Camille pulled a folded paper from her pocket, one she'd been carrying for days, waiting for the right moment. "Read this first," she said, handing it to him. Elian unfolded the paper, recognizing her handwriting immediately. It was a letter, dated 3 days earlier. "Dear Elian, I've been thinking about fate lately, about letters that find the wrong mailbox, but the right person. about how sometimes the best things in our lives come from moments that seem like mistakes at first. Before you, I'd forgotten how to hope. I'd forgotten what it feels like to be truly seen, to be known, to be loved for exactly who I am. You didn't just read my words, you heard my heart. In one of your early letters, you asked if some mistakes are actually redirections, guiding us toward where we're supposed to be. I believe now that they are. That letter was never meant for Jason. It was always meant for you. I carry your words with me every day. And if you'll have me, I want to carry them and you for all the days to come. Yes, Elian Thorne. My answer is yes. Love, Camille. Elian looked up from the letter, wonder spreading across his face. You knew I was going to ask? I hoped, she said simply. Emma mentioned you'd been looking at houses, and you've been carrying that box in your pocket for 3 days. You're not as subtle as you think. He laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. So much for my elaborate surprise. I've had enough surprises for one lifetime, Camille said, stepping closer to him. What I want now is certainty. You. Us. This story we're writing together. Elian took the ring from its box and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the light from the bookstore windows and sending small rainbows dancing across the shelves. I love you, Camille Drew, he said, gathering her into his arms. Thank you for writing that letter. I love you too, she whispered against his lips. Thank you for reading it. Behind them, Camille was vaguely aware of Emma announcing the news to Martha and the few customers still browsing the shelves. There were cheers and congratulations, but they felt distant, unimportant compared to the man holding her and the future stretching before them, a future born from a misdirected letter and the courage to begin again. That night, as they lay together in Elian's, their penthouse, Camille traced the lines of his face in the moonlight. I've been thinking, she said softly. A dangerous pastime, he teased, catching her hand and kissing her palm in that way that still made her heart flutter. I want to write our story, the real one, about a letter that found the wrong address but the right person. A romance novel? Elian looked intrigued. Set in a bookstore? Why not? It could be the first project for Turning Pages Press, the small publishing division I've been dreaming about starting. I think it's brilliant, he said, pulling her closer. On one condition. What's that? Make sure it has a happy ending, he kissed her gently. The kind that lasts forever. I promise, Camille whispered, knowing that the best part of their story was still being written, not on paper, but in the life they would build together, one day at a time. The letter that had once been filled with goodbyes had led to a beginning, more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. And in the end, that was the greatest plot twist of all.